trying to clear it, but before he could pull himself together again, it began to shrink back into babyhood once more. There was a shout from a room nearby, then a crash and a scream. "Run!" Harry yelled, turning quickly from the monstrous transformation taking place before him. "Ginny, Luna!" Harry Aman screamed. The death he did pulled his head out of the bell jar. His appearance was utterly bizarre, his tiny baby's head bawling loudly, while his thick arms flailed dangerously in all directions, narrowly missing Harry, who ducked. Harry raised his WN, but to his amazement, Hermione seized his arm. "You can't H a baby." There's no time to argue that point. Harry could hear more footsteps growing louder from the Hall of Prophecy they had just left, and knew too late that he ought not to have shouted and given away the position. "Come on," he said again, and leaving the ugly baby head of death he staggering behind them, they took off for the door that stood ajar at the end of the room leading back into the black hallway. They had run halfway toward it when Harry saw through the open door 2 more Death Eaters running across the black room toward them. Veering left, he burst instead into a small, dark, cluttered-off office and slammed the door behind them. "Call up," began Hermione, but before she could complete the spell, the door had burst open again, and the 2 Death Eaters had come hurling inside with a cry of triumph. Both yelled impedimenta. Harry, Hermione, and Neil were all knocked backward off their feet. Neil was thrown over the desk and disappeared from view. Hermione smashed into a bookcase and was promptly deluged into a cascade of heavy books. The back of Harry's head slammed into the stone wall behind him. Tiny lights basked in front of his eyes, and for a moment he was too dizzy and bewildered to react. "We've got him to death." He to nearest Harry in an office off Silencio cried Hermione, and the man's voice was extinguished. He continued to mouth through the hole in his mask, but no sound came out. He was thrust aside by his fellow Petrificus Totalis, shouted Harry as a second death. He'd raised his wand, his arms and legs snapped together, and he fell forward face down onto the rouged Harry's feet, stiff as a board and unable to move at all. "Well done, Hat." But the Death E to He-Man had just struck dumb, made a sudden slashing movement with his wand, from which flew a streak of what looked like purple flame. It passed right across Amon's chest. She gave a tiny "oh" as though of surprise, and then crumpled onto the floor where she lay motionless. Hermione. Harry fell to his knees beside her as Neville crawled rapidly toward her from under the desk, his wand held up in front of him. The Death Eater kicked out hard at Neville's head. As he emerged, his foot broke Neville's wand in two and connected with his face. Neville gave a howl of pain and recoiled, clutching his mouth and nose. Harry twisted around his own wand held high and saw that the Death He had ripped off his mask and was pointing his wand directly at Harry, who recognized the long, pale, twisted face from the Daily Prophet Anon Dove, the wizard who had murdered the Prince Dove. Grin with his free hand, he pointed from the prophecy still clutched in Harry's hand to himself, then at Hermione. Though he could no longer speak, his meaning could not have been clearer. "Give me the prophecy, or you'll get the same as her. Like, you won't kill us all the moment I hand it over anyway," said Harry. A whine of panic inside his head was preventing him thinking properly. He had one hand on Herman's shoulder, which was still warm, yet he did not dare look at her properly. "Don't let her be dead. Don't let her be dead. It's my fault if she's dead, whatever you do," Harry said. Neville feely from under the desk, lowering his hands to show a clearly broken nose and blood pouring down his mouth and chin. "Don't give it to him." Then there was a crash outside the door, and Duve looked over his shoulder. The baby head Deathy had appeared in the doorway, his head bowling, his great fists still flailing uncontrollably at everything around him. Harry seized his chance. Petrificus Totalis, the spell hit Dole up before he could block it, and he toppled forward across his comrade, both of them rigid as bow and unable to move an inch. "Monty," Harry said at once, shaking her, as the baby head Data blundered out of sight again. "Each man wake up," said Neil, crawling out from under the desk again to kneel at her other side, blood streaming from his rapidly swelling nose. "I don't know." Nail grubbed for Herman's wrist. "That's a pulse, Harry. I'm sure it is." Such a powerful wave of relief swept Harry. For a moment he felt lightheaded. She's alive. Yeah, I think so." There was a pause in which Harry listened hard for the sounds of more footsteps, but all he could hear were the whimpers and blunderings of the baby Death Eater in the next room. "Neville, we're not far from the exit," Harry whispered. "We're right next to that circular room. If we can just get you across it and find the right door before any more Death Eaters come, I bet you can get Monty up the corridor and into the lift. Then you can find someone, raise the alarm." "And what are you going to do?" said Neville, mopping his bleeding nose with his sleeve and frowning at Harry. "I've got to find the others," said Harry. "Well, I'll be going to find them with you," said Neville firmly. But Nan will take her with us," said Neville firmly. "I'll carry her. You're better at fighting than that He stood up and seized one of Hermione's arms, glad at Harry, who hesitated, then grabbed the other and helped hoist Hermione's limp form over Neville's shoulders. Wait, said Harry, snatching up Hermione's wand from the floor and shoving it into Neville's hand. You better take this. Nil kicked aside the broken fragments of his own wand. As he walked slowly toward the door. My grand's going to kill me, said Neville, thickly, blood spattering from his nose as he spoke. That was my dad's old one. Harry stuck his head out of the door and looked around cautiously. The baby-headed Death was screaming and banging into things, toppling grandfather clocks and overturning desks, bowling and confused with the glass cabinet that Harry now suspected had contained time tenors. Continue to fall, shatter, and repair itself on the wall behind them. He's never going to notice us, he whispered. Come on, keep close behind me. They crept out of the office and back toward the door in the black hallway, which now seemed completely darted. They walked a few steps forward, Nabble tottering slightly due to Hammond's weight. The door of the time room swung shut behind them, and the walls began to rotate once more. The recent blow on the back of Harry's head seemed to have unsteadied him. He narrowed his eyes, swung slightly until the walls stopped moving again. With a sinking heart, Harry saw that Hermione's fiery crosses had faded from the doors. So which way do you? But before they could make a decision as to which way to try, a door to their right sprang open, and 3 people fell out of it. Ron coaxed Harry, dashing toward them. Ginny, are you all? Harry said. Ron, giggling weakly, leaned forward, seizing the front of Harry's robes and gazing at him with unfocused eyes. There you are. You look funny, Harry. You're all messed up. Ron's face was very white, and something dark was trickling from the corner of his mouth. Next moment, his knees had given away, but he still clutched the front of Harry's robes, so that Harry was pulled into a kind of bout. Ginny, Harry said fearfully, what happened? But Ginny shook her head and slid down the wall into a sitting position, panting and holding her ankle. I think her ankle's broken. I heard something crack, whispered Luna, who's bending over her, and who alone seemed to be unhurt. 4 of them chased us into a dark room full of planets. It was a very odd place. Some of the time we were just floating in the dark. Hurry, we saw Uranus up close, said Ron, still giggling feebly. Get it, Harry? We saw Uranus. A bubble of blood GL grew at the corner of Ron's mouth and basked. Anyway, one of them grabbed Ginny's foot. I used the reductor curse and blew up Pluto in his face, but Luna gestured hopelessly at Ginny, who's breathing in a very shallow way, her eyes still closed. And what about Ron? Said Harry fearfully as Ron continued to giggle, still hanging off the front of Harry's robes. I don't know what they hit him with, said Luna sadly, but he's a bit funny. I could hardly get him along at all, Harry said. Ron pulling Harry's ear down to his mouth and still giggling weakly. You know who this girl is, Harry. She's loony love. Good, we've got to get out of here, said Harry firmly. Luna, can you help Ginny? Yes, said Luna, sticking her wand behind her ear for safekeeping, putting an arm around Ginny's waist and pulling her up. It's only my ankle. I can do it myself, said Ginny impatiently, but next moment she had collapsed sideways and grabbed Luna for support. Harry pulled Ron's arm over his shoulder, just as so many months ago he had pulled Dudley. He looked around. They had a 1 in 12 chance of getting the exit right the first time. He heaved on toward a door. They were within a few feet of it when another door across the hall burst open, and 3 Death Eaters sped into the hall, led by Bellatrix Lestrange. There they are, she shrieked. Stunning spell shot across the room. Harry smashed his way through the door ahead, flung Ron unceremoniously from him, and ducked back to help Neville in with Hermione. They were all over the threshold just in time to slam the door against Bellatrix. Calora shot at Harry, and he had 3 bodies slam into the door on the other side. It doesn't matter, said a man's voice. They're always in. We got them. They're here. Harry spun around. They were back in the brain room, and sure enough, there were doors all around the walls. He could hear footsteps in the hall behind them as more Death Eaters came running to join the fast. Luna, Neville, help me. The 3 of them tore around the room, sealing the doors. As they went, Harry crashed into a table and rolled over the top of it in his haste to reach the next door. Call Oris. There were footsteps running along behind the door. Every now and then another heavy body would launch itself against one, so it creaked and shuddered. Luna and Neville were bewitching the doors along the opposite wall. Then, as Harry reached the very top of the room, he heard Luna cry, color. He turned in time to see her flying through the air. 5 Death Eaters were surging into the room through the door. She had not reached in time. Luna hit a desk, slid over its surface, and onto the floor on the other side, where she lay sprawled as still as Hermione. Get Putter, shrieked Bellatrix as she ran at him. He dodged her and sprinted back up the room. He was safe as long as they thought he might hit the prophecy. Hey, said Ron, who had staggered to his feet and was now tottering drunkenly. toward Harry, giggling, "Hey Harry, there are brains in here. Isn't that weird, Harry? Ron, get out of the way, get down." But Ron had already pointed his wand at the tank. Has Harry, their brains look AO brain. The scene seemed momentarily frozen. Harry, Ginny, and Neville and each of the Death Eaters turned in spite of themselves to watch the top of the tank as a brain bashed from the green liquid like a leaping fish. For a moment it seemed suspended in midair, then it saw toward Ron, spinning as it came, and what looked like ribbons of moving images flew from it, unraveling. "Like ours of film, Harry, look at it," said Ron, watching it disgorge its GUI innards. "Harry, come and touch it, bet. It's weird, Ron." No, Harry did not know what would happen if Ron touched the tentacles of thought now flying behind them brain, but he was sure it would not be anything good. He darted forward, but Ron had already caught the brain in his outstretched hands. The moment they made contact with his skin, the tentacles began wrapping themselves around Ron's arms. "Like ropes, Harry, look what's happening." No, I don't like it. No, stop." But the thin ribbons were spinning around Ron's chest now. He tugged and tore at them as the brain was pulled tight against him like an octopus's body. "Defendo," yelled Harry, trying to sever the furs, wrapping themselves tightly around Ron's eyes. But they would not break. Ron fell over, still thrashing against his bones. "Harry, it will suffocate him," screamed Ginny, immobilized by her broken ankle on the floor. Then a jet of red light flew from one of the Death E's WNs and hit her S squarely in the face. She keeled over sideways and lay that unconscious. "Stupefy," shouted Nibble, wheeling around and waving Herman's wand at the oncoming Death Eaters. Stupefy. But nothing happened. One of the Death he just shot their own stunning spell at Nibble. It missed by inches. Harry and Nibble were now the only two left fighting the 5 Death Eaters, 2 of whom sent streams of civil light like arrows past them that left craters in the wall behind them. Harry ran for it as Bellatrix Lawrence sprinted right at him, holding heard the prophecy, and he dashed through the only door still open, the only one through which the Death Eaters themselves had come, inwardly praying that Neville would stay with Ron. Finding some way of releasing him, he ran a few feet into the next room and felt the floor vanish. He was falling. Prophecy high above his head, he sprinted back up the room. All he could think of doing was to draw the Death Eaters away from the others. It seemed to have worked. They straight at him, knocking chairs and tables flying, but not daring to bewitch him in case they heard the prophecy, and he dashed through the only door still open, the only one through which the Death Eaters themselves had come, inwardly praying that Neville would stay with Ron. Finding some way of releasing him, he ran a few feet into the next room and felt the floor vanish. He was falling down steep stone steps, step after steep stone step, bouncing on every tier until at last, with a crash that knocked all the breath out of his body, he landed flat on his back in the sunken pit where the stone archway stood on its DI. The whole room was ringing with Death Eaters' laughter. He looked up and saw the 5 who had been in the brain room descending toward him, whereas many more emerged through the other doorways and began leaping from bench to bench toward him. Harry got to his feet, though his legs were trembling so badly they barely supported him. The prophecy was still miraculously unbroken in his left hand, his wand clutched tightly in his right. He backed away, looking around, trying to keep all the Death Eaters within his sights. The back of his legs hit something solid. He'd reached the D where the archway was stood. He climbed back onto it. The Death Eaters all halted, gazing at him. Some were panting as hard as he was. One was bleeding badly. Door, freed of the full body bind, was leaning, his one pointing straight at Harry's face. "Potter, your races run draw." Lucius Malfoy, pulling off his mask. "Now hand me the prophecy like a good boy. Let the others go, and I'll give it to you," said Harry desperately. A few of the Doits laughed. "You are not in a position to bargain, Potter," said Lucius Malfoy, his pale face flushed with pleasure. "You see, there are 10 of us, and only one of you, or hasn't Dumbledore ever taught you how to count? Is that alone?" shouted a voice from above them. "He's still got me." Harry's heart sank. Neville was scrambling down the stone benches toward them. Herman's wand held fast in his trembling hand. "Neville, no, go back to Ron." "Stupefy," Neville shouted again, pointing his wand at each Death Ear. In turn, "Stupefy, Saint." One of the largest Death Ears seized Neville from behind, pinning his arms to His sides he struggled and kicked several of the Death East, laughed. It's Longbottom, isn't it? Sneed Lucius mouth. Oh well, your grandmother is used to losing family members, say our halls. Your death will not come as a great shock, Longbottom. Repeated Bellatrix, and a truly evil smile at G-Face. Why, I have had the pleasure of meeting your parents, boy. I know you have, roared Neville. And he fought so hard against his cap's inkling grip that the Death Eat shouted, someone stun him. No, 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 said Bellatrix. She looked transported alive with excitement as she glanced at Harry, then back at Nibble. Now, let's see how long Longbottom lasts before he cracks like his parents. Unless Potter wants to give us the prophecy, don't give it to them, roared Nibble, who seemed beside himself, kicking and writhing. His Belric drew nearer to him, and his captor her wand. Raise, don't give it to them, Harry. Beatrix raised her wand. Crucio Neal screamed, his legs drawn up to his chest, so that the Death Ear holding him was momentarily holding him off the ground. The Death Ear dropped him, and he fell to the floor, twitching and screaming in agony. That was just a taster, said Bellatrix, raising her W so that Nibble screamed top, and he lay sobbing at her feet. She turned and gazed up at Harry. Now, Porter, either give us the prophecy or watch your little friend die the hard way. Harry did not have to think. There was no choice. The prophecy was hot with the heat from clutching his hand as he held it out. Malloy jumped forward to take it, then high above them 2 more doors burst open and 5 more people sprinted into the room. Saris, Lupin, Moody, Tonks, and Kingsley Mallow turned and raised his wand, but Tonks had already sent a stunning spell right at him. Harry did not wait to see whether it had made contact, but dived off the dice out of the way. The Death Eaters were completely distracted by the appearance of the members of the Order, who were now raining spells down upon them as they jumped from step to step toward the sunken floor. Through the darting bodies, the flashes of light, Harry could see Nibble crawling along. He dodged another jet of red light and flung himself flat on the ground to reach Nibble. Are you okay? He yelled as another spell soared inches over their heads. Yes, said Neville, trying to pull himself up. And Ron, I think he's all right. He was still fighting the brain when I left the stone floor. Between them exploded as a spell hit it, leaving a crater right where Neville's hand had been. Seconds before 4, both scrambled away from the spot. Then a thick arm came out of nowhere, seized Harry around the neck, and pulled him upright so that his toes were barely touching the floor. Give it to me, growled the voice in his ear. Give me the prophecy. The man was pressing so tightly on Harry's windpipe that he could not breathe. Through watering eyes, he saw Cyrus doing with the Dead Ear some 10 feet away. Kingsley was fighting too at once. Tonks, still halfway up the Ted Seeds, was firing spells down at Belric. Nobody seemed to realize that Harry was dying. He turned his wand backward toward the man's side, but had no breath to utter incantation, and the man's free hand was groping toward the hand in which Harry was grasping the prophecy. Nail had come lunging out of nowhere, unable to articulate a spell. He had jabbed Harry at once with a howl of pain, and Harry went around to face him and gasped, stupefied. The Death Eater keeled over backward and his mask clipped off. It was McNair Buckbeak's would-be killer, one of his eyes now swollen and bloodshot. Thanks, Harry said to Neville, pulling him aside, as serious as. And the Death Ears layered past, dueling so fastly that their wands blurs. Then Harry's foot made contact with something round and hard, and he slipped for a moment. He thought he had dropped the prophecy, then saw Moody's magic eye spinning away across the floor. Its owner was now lying on his side, bleeding from the head, and his attack was now bearing upon Harry and Neville. Doob, his long pale face twisted with glee, Tarantara. He shouted, his one pointing at Neville, whose legs went immediately into a kind of frenzy top dance, unbalancing him and causing him to fall to the floor again. Now, Porter, he made the same slashing movement with his wand that he had used on Hermione. Just as Harry yelled, Proto-Harry felt something streak across his face like a blunt knife, but the force of it knocked him sideways, and he fell over Neville's jacking legs. But the shield charm had stopped the W of the spell. Duve raised his W again as Cyrus fled out of nowhere, rammed Duve with his shoulder and sent him flying out of the way. The prophecy had again flown to the tips of Harry's fingers, but he had managed to cling to it. Now Cyrus and Doahav were dueling, their wands flashing like swords, sparks flying from their war tips. Duve drew back his wand to make the same slashing movement he had used on Harry and Hermione. Springing up, Harry yelled Petrificus Totalis once again. Dav's arms and legs snapped together, and he keeled over backward, landing with a crash on his back. Nice one, shouted Sirius, forcing Harry's head down as a pair of stunning spells flew toward them. No, I want you to get out of. They both ducked again. A jet of green light had narrowly missed Cyrus across the room. Harry saw Tonks fall from halfway up the stone steps, her limp form toppling from stone seat to stone seat, and Bellatrix triumphant, running back toward the fry. Harry grabbed the prophecy, grabbed Neville, and "Run, Sirius!" yelled, dashing to meet Bellatrix. Harry did not see what happened next. Kingsley swayed across his field of vision, battling with the pockmarked Rookwood, now maskless. Another jet of green light flew over Harry's head and launched himself toward Neville. "Can you stand?" he bellowed in Neville's ear, as Neville's leg jacked and twitched uncontrollably. "Put your arm around my neck." Neville did so. Harry heaved. Neville's legs were still flying in every direction. They would not support him. And then, out of nowhere, a man lunged at them. Both fell backward, Neville's legs waving wildly like an overturned beetles. Harry, with his left arm held up in the air to try and save the small glass ball from being smashed. "The prophecy, give me the prophecy, Potter," snarled Lucius Malus' voice in his ear, and Harry felt the tip of mouth OW pressing hard between his ribs. "No, get off me, Neville, catch it." Harry flung the prophecy across the floor. Neville spun himself around on his back and scooped the ball to his chest. Malfoy pointed the one instead at Neil, but Harry jabbed his own one back over his shoulder and yelled impedimenta. Malfoy was blasted off his back as Harry scrambled up again. He looked around and saw Malfoy smash into the dais on which Cyrus and Bellatrix were now dueling. Malfoy aimed his wand at Harry and Neville again, but before he could draw breath to strike, Lupin had jumped between them. Harry rounded up the others and go. Harry seized Neville by the shoulder of his robes and lifted him bodily onto the fast tier of the stone steps. Neville's legs twitched and jacked and would not support his weight. Harry heaved again with all the strength he possessed, and they climbed. Another step, a spell hit the stone bench at Harry's heel. It crumbled away, and he fell back to the step below. Neil sank to the ground, his legs still jacking and thrashing, and thrust the prophecy into his pocket. "Come on," said Harry desperately, hauling at Inai's robes. "Just try and push with your legs." He gave another stupendous heave, and Neville's robes tore all along the left. Sini, the small spun glass ball, dropped from his pocket, and before either of them could catch it, one of Neville's floundering feet kicked it. It flew some 10 feet to their right and smashed on the step beneath them. As both of them stared at the place where it had broken, appalled at what had happened, a pearly white figure with hugely magnified eyes rose into the air unnoticed by any but them. Harry could see its mouth moving, but in all the crashes and screams and yells around them, not one word of the prophecy could be had. The figure stopped speaking and dissolved into nothingness. "Harry, I'm sorry," cried Neville, his face anguished as his legs continued to flounder. "I'm so sorry, Harry. I didn't mean to." "It doesn't matter," Harry shouted. "Just try and stand. Let's get out of Dumbledore," said Nibble, his sweaty face suddenly transported, staring over Harry's shoulder. "What Dumbledore?" Harry turned to look. When Neil was staring directly above them, framed in the doorway from the brain room, stood Albus Dumbledore, his wand aloft, his face white and furious. Harry felt a kind of electric charge through every particle of his body. They were saved. Dumbledore sped down the steps past Neville and Harry, who had no more thought of leaving. Dumb was already at the foot of the steps. When the Death Eaters nearest realized he was there were yells. One of the Death Eaters ran forward, scrabbling like a monkey up the stone steps opposite. Dumbledore's spell pulled him back as easily and effortlessly as though he had hooked him with an invisible line. Only one couple was still battling, apparently unaware of the new arrival. Harry saw Sirius duck Bellatrix's jet of red light. He was laughing at her. "Come on, you can do better than that," he yelled, his voice echoing around the cavernous room. The second jet of light hit him squarely on the chest. The laugh had not quite died from his face, but his eyes widened in shock. Harry released Neville, though he was unaware. Doing so, he was jumping down the steps again, pulling out his wand. As Dumbledore turned to the D2, it seemed to take Sirius an age to fall. His body curved in a graceful arc as he sank backward through the ragged veil hanging from the arch, and Harry saw the look of mingled fear and surprise on his grandfather's wasted, once handsome face as he fell through the end doorway and disappeared behind the veil, which flooded for a moment, as though in a high wind, then fell back into place. Harry heard Bellatrix Lr's triumphant scream, but knew it meant nothing. Cyrus had only just fallen through the archway. He would reappear from the other side any second, but Cyrus did not reappear. "Cyrus!" Harry yelled. Sirius, he'd reached the floor, his breath coming in. Saren gasped. Sirius might just be behind the curtain. Harry would pull him back out. Again, but as he reached the ground and sprinted toward the DS, Lupin grabbed Harry around the chest, holding him back. "There's nothing you can do, Harry. Get him, save him. He's only just gone through. It's too late, Harry. We can still reach him." Harry struggled hard and viciously, but Lupin would not let go. "There's nothing you can do, Harry. Nothing. He's gone." Chapter 36. The only one he ever feared he hasn't gone, Harry yelled. He did not believe it. He would not believe it. Still, he fought Lupin with every bit of strength he had. Lupin did not understand people hid behind that curtain. He had heard them whispering the first time he entered the room. Sirius was hiding, simply elking out of sight. "Sirius," he bellowed. "Sirius, he can't come back," Harry said. Lupin, his voice breaking as he struggled to contain Harry. He can't come back because he is not dead," roared Harry. "Sirius." There was movement going on all around them, pointless, bustling, the flashes of more spells to Harry. It was meaningless noise, the deflected casts flying past them did not matter. Nothing mattered, except that Lupin stopped pretending that Sirius, who was standing feet from them behind that old curtain, was not going to merge at any moment, shaking back his dark hand, eager to re-enter the battle. Lupin dragged Harry away from the D. Harry was still staring at the archway, angry at Cyrus now for keeping him waiting. But some part of him realized, even as he fought to break free from Lupin, that Sirius had never kept him waiting before. Sirius had risked everything always to see Harry, to him. If Sirius was not reappearing out of that archway when Harry was yelling for him as though his life depended on it, the only possible explanation was that he could not come back, that he really was. Dumbledore had most of the remaining Death Eaters grouped in the middle of the room, seemingly immobilized by invisible ropes. Moody had crawled across the room to where Tonks lay and was attempting to revive her behind the D. There were still flashes of light, grunts, and cries. Kingsley had run forward to continue Sirius's do with Bellatrix. "Hurry, Neville!" had slid down the stone benches one by one to the place where Harry stood. Harry was no longer struggling against Lupin, who maintained a precautionary grip on his arm. "Nevertheless, Harry, I'm really sorry," said Neville. His legs were still dancing uncontrollably. "Was that man with Sirius Black a friend of yours?" Harry nodded. "Here," said Lupin, quietly pointing his wand at Neville's legs. He said, "Finite." The spell was lifted. Neville's legs fell back onto the floor and remained still. Lupin's face was pale. Let's find the others. Where are they all?" Nibble. Lupin turned away from the archway. As he spoke, it sounded as though every word was causing him pain. "They're all back there," said Neville. "A brain attacked Ron, but I think he's all right, and her is unconscious. But we could feel it, boss." There's a loud bang and a yell from behind the D. Harry saw Kingsley yelling in pain hit the ground. Bellatrix, the stage, turned tail and ran as Dumbledore whipped around. He aimed a spell at her, but she deflected it. She was halfway up the steps. "Now, Harry, now," cried Lupin. But Harry had already ripped his arm from Lupin's slack and grip. "She killed Sirius," bellowed Harry. "She killed him. I'll kill her." And he was off scrambling up the stone benches. People were shouting behind him, but he did not care. The hem of Bellatrix's robes whipped out a sight ahead, and they were back in the room where the brains were swimming. She aimed to see over her shoulder. The tank rose into the air and tipped. Harry was deluge D in the foul-smelling potion within the brain slipped and slid all over him and began spinning their long-colored tentacles. But he shouted "Wosa," and they flew into the air away from him, slipping and sliding. He ran on toward the door. He leapt over Luna, who was groaning on the floor, past Ginny, who said, "Harry, what?" Past Ron, who giggled feebly, and Hermione, who was still unconscious. He wrenched open the door into the circular black hall and saw Bellatrix disappearing through a door on the other side of the room. Beyond her was the corridor leading back to the lifts. He ran, but she had slammed the door behind her, and the walls had begun to rotate again. Once more, he was surrounded by streaks of blue light from the welling candelabra. "Where's the exit?" he shouted desperately as the wall rumbled to a halt. Again, where has the way out? The room seemed to have been waiting for him to ask. The door right behind him flew open, and the corridor toward the lift stretched ahead of him, torch-lit and empty. He ran. He could hear a lift clattering ahead of him. He sprinted up the passageway, swung around the corner, and slammed his fist onto the button to call a second lift. It jangled and banged lower and lower. The grill slid open, and Harry dashed inside, now hammering the button marked atrium. The door slid shut, and he was rising. He forced his way out to the lift before the grills were fully open and looked around. Bellatrix was almost at the telephone lift at the other end of the hall, but she looked back as he sprinted toward her and aimed another spell at him. He dodged behind the fountain of magical brethren. The spell zoomed past him and hit the rot golden gates at the other end of the atrium, so that they rang like bells. There were no more footsteps. She had stopped running. He crouched behind the statues, listening. Come out, little Harry," she called in a mock baby voice, which echoed off the polished wooden floor. "What did you come after me for?" "Then I thought you were here to avenge my dear cousin, I am," shouted Harry, and a score of ghostly Harry seemed to chorus, I am. Around the room, did you love him, little baby Porter? Hatred rose in Harry, such as he had never known before. He flung himself out from behind the fountain and bellowed Crucio. Bellatrix screamed. The spell had knocked her off her feet, but she did not writhe and shriek with pain as Neville hid. She was already on her feet. Again breathless, no longer laughing, Harry dodged behind the Gilden fountain again. Her counter spell hit the head the handsome wizard, which was blown off and landed 20 feet away, gooting long scratches into the wooden floor never used. "An unforgivable curse before have you, boy," she yelled. She had abandoned her baby voice. "Now you need to mean them, Porter. You need to really want to cause pain to enjoy it. Righteous anger won't hurt me for long. I'll show you how it's done. Shall I? I'll give you a lesson." Harry had been edging around the fountain on the other side. She screamed, "Cruel!" and he was forced to duck down again as the centaur's arm holding out its bow spun off and landed with a crash on the floor a short distance from the golden wizard's head. "Porter, you cannot win against me," she cried. He could hear her moving to the right, trying to get a clear shot of him. He backed around the statue, away from her, crouching behind the centaur's legs, his head level with the house elves. "I was and am the Dark Lord's most loyal servant. I learned the dark arts from him, and I know spells of such power that you pathetic little boy can never hope to compete." "Stupefy," yelled Harry. He had edged right around to where the goblin stood, beaming up at the now headless wizard and taking aim at her back as she peered around the fountain. For him, she reacted so fast he barely had time to duck. Proto, the jet of red light, his own stunning spell, bounced back at him. Harry scrambled back behind the fountain, and one of the goblin's ears went flying across the room. "Porter, I am going to give you one chance," shouted Bellatrix. "Give me the prophecy, roll it toward me now, and I may spare your life. Well, he going to have to kill me, because it's gone," Harry roared, and as he shouted it, pain seared across his forehead. His scar was on fire again, and he felt a surge of fury that was quite unconnected with his own rage. "And he knows," said Harry with a mad laugh to match Bellatrix's own. "Your dear old mate Voldemort knows it's gone. He's not going to be happy with you, is he?" What do you mean?" she cried, and for the first time there was fear in her voice. "The prophecy smashed when I was trying to get Neville up the steps. What do you think Vor will say about that?" Then his scar seared and burned. The pain of it was making his eyes scream. "Liar," she shrieked, but he could hear the terror behind the anger. "Now you've got it, Potter, and you will give it to me. Your prophecy. Harry laughed again because he knew it would incense her, the pain building in his head so badly he thought his skull might burst. He waved his empty hand from behind the one-eared goblin and withdrew it quickly as she sent another jet of green light flying at him. "Nothing there," he shouted. "Nothing to summon it smashed. And nobody had what it said. Tell your boss that." "No," she screamed. "It isn't true. You're lying, Master. I tried. Do not punish me. Don't waste your breath," yelled Harry, his eyes screwed up against the pain in his scar, now more terrible than ever. "He can't hear you from here, can't I, Potter?" said a high, cold voice. Harry opened his eyes, tall, thin, and black, hooded, his terrible snake-like face white and gaunt, his scarlet-slit peel eyes staring. Lord Voldemort had appeared in the middle of the hall, his one pointed at Harry, who stood frozen, quite unable to move. "So you smashed my prophecy," said Voldemort, softly staring at Harry with those pitiless red eyes. "No, Bella, he is not lying. I see the truth at me from within his worthless mind. Months of preparation, months of effort, and my Death Eaters have let Harry Potter thwart me again. Master, I am sorry. I knew not I was fighting the Animus Black," sobbed Bellatrix, flinging herself down at Voldemort's feet as he paced slowly nearer. "Master, you should know. Be quiet, fell," said Voldemort dangerously. "I shall deal with you in a moment. Do you think I have entered the Ministry of Magic to hear your sniveling apologies? But Master, he is here. He is below." Voldemort paid no attention. "I have nothing more to say to you, Potter," he said quietly. "You have erred me too often for too long." Harry had not even opened his mouth to resist. His mind was blank, his one pointing uselessly at the floor. But the headless Gilden statue of the wizard in the fountain had sprung alive, leaping from its plinth, and landed on the floor with a crash between Harry and Voldemort. The spell merely glanced off its chest as the statue flung out its arms, protecting Harry. "What?" said Voldemort, staring around, and then he breathed. "Dumbledore." Harry looked behind him. His heart-pounding Dumbledore was standing in front of the Gilden Gates. Voldemort raised his W and said another jet of green light at Dumbledore, who turned and was gone in a welling of his cloak. Next second, he had reappeared behind Voldemort and waved his wand toward the remnants of the fountain. The other statues sprang to life too. The statue of the witch ran at Bellatrix, who screamed incense spells streaming uselessly off its chest before it dived at her, pinning her to the floor. Meanwhile, the goblin in the house of scuttled toward the fireplaces set along the wall, and the one-armed centaur galloped at Voldemort, who vanished and reappeared beside the pool. The headless statue thrust Harry backward away from the fight as Dumbledore advanced on Voldemort and the Gilden Centaur caned around them. Both it was foolish to come here tonight, Tom said Dumbledore calmly. The oars are on their way, by which time I shall be gone. And you dead spat Voldemort, he sent another killing. Curse at Dumbledore, but missed instead, hitting the security guards. Desk with burst into flame. Dumbledore flicked his own wand. The force of the spell that emanated from it was such that Harry, though shielded by a stone guard, felt his hair stand on end as it passed, and this time Vor was forced to conjure a shining silver shield out of thin air to deflect it. The spell, whatever it was, caused no visible damage to the shield, though a deep gong-like note reverberated from it, an oddly chilling sound. You do not seek to kill me, Dumbledore called Voldemort, his scarlet eyes narrowed over the top of the shield. How of such brutality are you? We both know that there are other ways of destroying a man, Tom, Dumbledore said calmly, continuing to walk toward Voldemort, as though he had not a fear in the wild, as though nothing had happened. To interrupt his STR up the hall, merely taking your life would not satisfy me. I admit there is nothing worse than death, Dumbledore sneered. Voldemort, you are quite wrong, said Dumbledore, still closing in upon Voldemort and speaking lightly, as though they were discussing the matter of a drink. Harry felt scared to see him walking along, undefended, shieldless. He wanted to cry out a warning, but his headless guard kept shutting him backward toward the wall, blocking his every attempt to get out from behind it. Indeed, your failure to understand that there are things much worse than death has always been your greatest weakness. Another jet of green light flew from behind the silver shield. This time, it was the one-armed centaur galloping in front of Dumbledore that took the blast and shattered into 100 pieces. But before the fragments had even hit the floor, Dumbledore had drawn back his wand and waved it as though brandishing a whip. A long, thin flame flew from the top. It wrapped itself around Voldemort's shield, and all for a moment it seemed Dumbledore had won. But then the fiery rope became a serpent, which relinquished its hold upon Voldemort at once and turned hissing furiously to face Dumbledore. Voldemort vanished. The snake reared from the floor, ready to strike. There was a burst of flame in mid-air above Dumbledore, just as Voldemort reared, standing on the plinth in the middle of the pool, where so recently the 5 statues had stood. Look out, Harry yelled. But even as he shouted, one more jet of green light had flown at Dumbledore from Voldemort's wand, and the snake had struck Fox, swooped down in front of Dumbledore, opened his beak wide and swallowed the jet of green light whole. He beard into flame and fell to the floor, small, wrinkled, and flightless. At the same moment, Dumbledore brandished his W in one long fluid moment. The snake, which had been an instant from sinking its fangs into him, flew high and vanished in a wisp of dark smoke. The water in the pool rose up and covered Voldemort like a cocoon of molten glass. For a few seconds, Voldemort was visible only as a dark, rippling, faceless figure, shimmering and indistinctly upon the plinth, clearly struggling to throw off the suffocating mass. Then he was gone, and the water fell with a crash back into its pool, slopping wildly over the sides, drenching the polished floor. Master screamed. Bellatrix, sure it was over, sure Voldemort had decided to flee. Harry made to run out from behind his statue guard, but Dumbledore bellowed, "Stay where you are, Harry." For the first time, Dumbledore sounded frightened. Harry could not see why the hall was quite empty, but for themselves, the sobbing Bellatrix still trapped under a statue, and the tiny baby fox croaking feebly on the floor. And then Harry's scar burst open. He knew he was dead. It was pain beyond imagining, pain past endurance. He was gone from the hall. He was locked in the coils of a creature with red eyes so tightly bound that Harry did not know where his body ended and the creature's began. They were fused together, be bound by pain, and there was no escape. And when the creature spoke, it used Harry's mouth, so that in his agony he felt his jaws move. "Kill me now." Dumbledore, blinded and dying every part of him, screaming for release. Harry felt the creature use him again. If death is nothing, Dumbledore, kill the boy, let the pain stop. Thought Harry, let him kill us, end it. Dumbledore, death is nothing compared to this, and I'll see Cyrus again. And as Harry's heart filled with emotion. The creature's coils loosened. The pain was gone. Harry was lying face down on the floor. His glass was gone, shivering as though he lay upon ice, not wood. And there were voices echoing through the hall, more voices than there should have been. Harry opened his eyes, saw his glasses lying at the heel of the headless statue that had been guarding him, but which now lay flat on its back, cracked and immobile. He put them on and raised his head an inch to find a Dumbo's crooked nose inches from his owner. "You all right, Harry?" "Yes," said Harry, shaking so violently he could not hold his head up properly. "Yeah, where's Voldemort? Who are these?" What's the atrium was full of people. The floor was reflecting emerald green flames that had burst into life in all the fireplaces along one wall, and a stream of witches and wizards was emerging from them as Doomer pulled him back to his feet. Harry saw the tiny gilt statues of the house elf, and the goblin leading a stunned-looking Cornelius Fudge forward. He was there, shouted a scarlet-red man with a ponytail who's pointing at a pile of gilt and rubble on the other side of the hall, where Bellatrix had land-trapped moments before. "I saw him, Mr. Fudge. I swear it was, you know who, he grabbed a woman and disapparated. I know Williams. I know I saw him too." Gib Fudge, who was wearing pajamas under his pinstriped cloak and was gasping as though he had just run Miles Murren's beard here in the Ministry of Magic. Great heavens above it. "It doesn't seem possible, my word. How can this be? If you proceed downstairs into the Department of Mysteries, Cornelius," said Dumbledore, apparently satisfied that Harry was all right, and walking forward so that newcomers realized he was there for the first time. A few of them raised their Ws, others simply looked amazed. The statues of the elf and goblin applauded, and Fudge jumped so much that his slipper-clad feet left the floor. "You'll find several escaped death that is contained in the death chamber, bound by anti-disapperjinks and waiting for your decision as to what to do with them." Dumbledore gasps. Fudge, apparently beside himself with amazement. "You hear? He looks wildly around the auras he had brought with him, and it could not have been clearer that he was in a half-mind to cry. "Seize him, Cullis. I am ready to fight your men and win again," said Dumbledore in a thunderous voice. "But a few minutes ago you saw proof with your own eyes that I have been telling you the truth for a year. Lord Voldemort has returned. You have been chasing the wrong man for 12 months, and it is time you listen to sense. I don't well bless," said F.G.E., looking around as though hoping somebody was going to tell him what to do. When nobody did, he said, "Very well, Dawlish Williamson. Go down to the Department of Mysteries and see Dumbledore. You will need to tell me exactly the fountain of magical brethren." "What happened?" he added in a kind of whimper, staring around at the floor, where the remains of the statues of the witch, wizard, and centaur now scattered. "We can discuss that after I have sent Harry back to Hogwarts," said Dumbledore. Harry Potter. Fudge wheeled around and stared at Harry, who was still standing against the wall beside the fallen statue that had been guarding him during Dumbledore and Voldemort's duel. "He here," said Fudge, goggling at Harry. "Why, what's all this about?" "I shall explain everything," repeated Dumbledore. "When Harry is back at school." He walked away from the pool to the place where the Gilden Wizard's head lay on the floor. He pointed his wand at it and muttered PTIs. The head glowed blue and trembled noisily against the wooden floor for a few seconds, then became still once more. "Now see here, Dumbledore," said Fudge as Dumbledore picked up the head and walked back to Harry carrying it. "You haven't got authorization for that portkey. You can't do things like that right in front of the Minister of Magic. You," his voice faltered as Dumbledore surveyed him malely over his half-moon spectacles. "You will give the order to remove Dolores Umbridge from Hogwarts," said Dumbledore. "You will tell your auras to stop searching for my care of magical creatures, teacher, so he can return to work. I will give you." Dumbledore pulled a watch with 12 hands from his pockets and surveyed it. "Half an hour of my time tonight, in which I think we shall be more than able to cover the important points of what has happened here. After that I shall need to return to my school. If you need more help from me, you are of course more than welcome to contact me at Hogwarts. Letters addressed to the headmaster will find me." Fudge goggled worse than ever. His mouth was open and his round face grew pinker under his rumpled gray hair. You Dumbledore turned his back on him. "Take this key." Harry, he held out the gilded head of the statue, and Harry placed his hand upon it, past caring what he did next or where he went. "I shall see you in half an hour," said Dumbledore quietly. 1, 2, 3. Harry felt the familiar sensation of a hook being jacked behind his nuball. The polished wooden floor was gone from beneath his feet. The atrium, Fudge, and Dumbledore had all disappeared, and he was flying forward in a whirlwind of color and sound. Chapter 37. The Lost Prophecy. Harry's feet hit solid ground again. His knees buckled a little and the Gilded Wizard's head fell with a resounding clunk to the floor. He looked around and saw that he had arrived in Dumbo's office. Everything seemed to have repainted itself during the headmaster's absence. The delicate silver instrument stood again on the spindle-legged tables, puffing and wearing serenely. The portraits of the headmasters and headmistresses were snoozing in their frames, heads lolling back in armchairs or against the edge of their pictures. Harry looked through the window. There was a cool line of pale green along the horizon. Dawn was approaching. The silence and the stillness, broken only by the occasional grunt or snuffle of a sleeping portrait, was unbearable to him. If his surroundings could have reflected the feelings inside him, the pictures would have been screaming in pain. He walked around the quiet, beautiful office, breathing quickly, trying not to think. But he had to think. There was no escape. It was his fault Cyrus had died. It was all his fault. If Harry had not been stupid enough to fall for Voldemort's trick, if he had not been so convinced that what he had seen in his dream was real, if he had only opened his mind to the possibility that Voldemort was, as a man had said, banking on Harry's love of playing the hero, was unbearable. He would not think about it. He could not stand it. There was a terrible hollow inside him. He did not want to feel or examine a dark hole. While Sirius had been Cyrus had vanished, he did not want to have to be alone with that great silent space. He could not stand it. A picture behind him gave a particularly loud grunting snore, and a cool voice said, "Ah, Harry Potter." Phineas Nigellus gave a long yawn, stretching his arms as he surveyed Harry out of shrewd, narrowed eyes. "And what brings you here in the early hours of the morning?" said Phineas. "This office is supposed to be barred to all but the rightful headmaster, or as Dumbledore sent you here." "He don't tell me." He gave another shuddering yawn. "Another message for my worthless great-great-grandson." Harry could not speak. Phineas Nigellus did not know that Sirius was dead, but Harry could not tell him to say it aloud would be to make it final, absolute, irretrievable. A few more of the portraits had started. Now terror of being interrogated made Harry stride across the room and seize the doorknob. It would not turn. He was shut in. "I hope this means," said the corpulent, red-nosed wizard who hung on the wall behind Dumbledore's desk, "that Dumbledore will soon be back with us." Harry turned. The wizard was surveying him with great interest. Harry nodded. He tugged again on the door, not behind his back, but it remained immovable. "Oh, good," said the wizard. "It has been very dull without him, very dull indeed." He settled himself on the throne-like chair on which he had been painted and smiled benignly upon Harry. "Dumbledore thinks very highly of you, as I'm sure you know," he said comfortably. "Oh yes, holds you in great esteem." The guilt filling the whole of Harry's chest like some monstrous, weighty parasite now read and squirmed. Harry could not stand this. He could not stand being Harry anymore. He never felt more trapped inside his own head and body, never wished so intensely that he could be somebody, anybody else. The empty fireplace burst into emerald green flame, making Harry leap away from the door, staring at the men spinning inside the grate. As Dumbledore's tall form unfolded itself from the fire, the wizards and witches on the surrounding walls jacked awake. Many of them gave cries of welcome. "Thank you," said Dumbledore softly. He did not look at Harry at first, but walked over to the patch beside the door and withdrew from an inside pocket of his robes the tiny, ugly, featherless fox, whom he placed gently on the tray of soft ashes beneath the gilded post where the full-grown fox usually stood. "Well, Harry," said Dumbledore, finally turning away from the baby bed, "you'll be pleased to hear that none of your fellow students are going to suffer lasting damage from the night's events." Harry tried to say good, but no sound came out. It seemed to him that Dumbledore was reminding him of the amount of damage he had caused by his actions tonight. And although Dumbledore was for once looking at him directly, though his expression was kindly rather than accusatory, Harry could not bear to meet his eyes. "Madame Pomfrey is patching everybody up now," said Dumbledore. "Needor Tonks may need to spend a little time at sea, but it seems that she will make a full recovery." Harry contented himself with nodding at the carpet, which was growing lighter as the sky outside grew paler. He was sure that all the portraits around the room were listening closely to every word Dumbledore spoke, wondering where Dumbledore and Harry had been and why there had been injuries. "I know how you are feeling," Harry said. Dumbledore very quietly. "No, you don't," said Harry, and his voice was suddenly loud and strong. White-hot anger leapt inside him. Dumbledore knew nothing about his feelings. "You see, Dumbledore," said Phineas Nigellus slightly, "never tried to understand the students. They hated. They would much rather be tragically misunderstood, wallow in self-pity, stew in their own." "That's enough, Phineas," said Dumbledore. Harry turned his back on Dumbledore and stared deadly out of the opposite window. He could see the Quidditch stadium in the distance. Sirius had appeared there once disguised as the shaggy black dog so he could watch Harry play. He had probably come to see whether Harry was as good as James had been. Harry had never asked him. There is no shame in what you are feeling, Harry said. Dumbo's voice, on the contrary, the fact that you can feel pain like this is your greatest strength. Harry felt the white-hot anger lick his insides, blazing in the terrible emptiness, filling him with the desire to heart Dumbledore for his calmness and his empty words. My greatest strength, as it said. Harry, his voice shaking as he stared out of the Quidd Stadium, no longer seeing it. You haven't got a clue. You don't know what don't I know, said Dumbledore calmly. It was too much. Harry turned around shaking with rage. I don't want to talk about how I feel. All right, Harry, suffering like this proves you are still a man. This pain is part of being human. Then I don't want to be human, Harry roared. And he seized one of the delicate silver instruments from the spindle-legged table beside him and flung it across the room. It shattered into 100 tiny pieces against the wall. Several of the pictures let out yells of anger and fright. And the portrait of Amando Dippet said, really, I don't care, Harry yelled at them, snatching up a Luno's scope and throwing it into the fireplace. I've had enough. I've seen enough. I want out. I want it to end. I don't care anymore. He seized the table on which the silver instrument had stood, and through that too it broke apart on the floor and the legs rolled in different directions. You do care, said Dumbledore. He had not flinched or made a single move to stop Harry demolishing his office. His expression was calm and was detached. You care so much you feel as though you would bleed to death with the pain of it. I don't, Harry screamed so loudly that he felt his throat might tear, and for a second he wanted to rush at Dumbledore and break him to shatter that calm, oated face, shake him, hurt him, make him feel some tiny part of the horror inside Harry. Oh yes, you do, said Dumbledore still more calmly. You have now lost your mother, lost your father, and the closest thing to a parent you have ever known. Of course you care. You don't know how I feel, Harry roared. You standing there, you. But words were no longer enough. Smashing things was no more help. He wanted to run. He wanted to keep running and never look back. He wanted to be somewhere he could not see the clear blue eyes staring at him, that hatefully calm old face. He turned on his heel and ran to the door, seized the doorknob again, and wrenched at it, but the door would not open. Harry turned back to Dumbledore. Let me out, he said. He was shaking from head to foot. No, said Dumbledore. Simply for a few seconds they stared at each other. Let me out, Harry said again. No, Dumbledore repeated. If you don't, if you keep me in here, if you don't let me, by all means continue destroying my possessions, Dumbledore said serenely. I dare say I have too many. He walked around his desk and sat down behind it, watching Harry. Let me out, Harry said yet again in a voice that was cold and almost as calm as Dumbledore. Not until I have had my say, said Dumbledore. Do you think I want it? Do you think I give up? I don't care what you've got to say, Harry wrote. I don't want to hear anything you've got to say, you will, said Dumbledore sadly. Because you are not nearly as angry with me as you ought to be. If you are to attack me, as I know you are close to doing, I would like to have thoroughly earned it. What are you talking? It is my fault that Cyrus died, said Dumbledore clearly. Oh, I should say almost entirely my fault. I will not be so arrogant as to claim responsibility for the whole. Sirius was a brave, clever, and energetic man. Such men are not usually content to sit at home in hiding while they believe others to be in danger. Nevertheless, you should never have believed for an instant that there was any necessity for you to go to the Department of Mysteries tonight. If I had been open with you, Harry, as I should have been, you would have known a long time ago that Voldemort might try and lie you to the Department of Mysteries, and you would never have been tricked into going there tonight, and Cyrus would not have had to come after you. That blame lies with me alone. Harry was still standing with his hand on the doorknob, but he was unaware of it. He was gazing at Dumbledore, hardly breathing, listening, yet barely understanding what he was hearing. Please sit down, said Dumbledore. It was not an order, it was a request. Harry hesitated, then walked slowly across the room, now led with silver cogs and fragments of wood, and took the seat facing Dork desk. I might understand, said Phineas Nigel slowly. From Harry's left, that my great-grandson, the last of the Blacks, is dead. Yes, Phineas, said Dumbledore. I don't believe it, said Phineas brusquely. Harry turned his head in time to see Phineas marching out of his portrait, and knew that he had gone to visit his other painting and Grimmauld Place. He would walk perhaps from portrait to portrait, calling for Cyrus through the house. Harry, I owe you an explanation, said Dumbledore. An explanation of an old man's mistakes, for I see now that what I have done and not done with regard to you bears all the hallmarks of the failings of age. You cannot know how age thinks and feels, but old men are guilty if they forget what it was to be young, and I seem to have forgotten lately. The sun was rising properly now. There was a rim of dazzling orange visible over the mountains, and the sky above it was colorless and bright. The light fell upon Dumbledore, upon the silver of his eyebrows and beard, upon the lines gouged deeply into his face. I guessed 15 years ago, said Dumbledore, when I saw the scar upon your forehead, what it might mean. I guess that it might be the sign of a connection forged between you and Lord Voldemort. You've told me this before, Professor said Harry bluntly. He did not care about being rude. He did not care about anything very much anymore. Yes, said Dumbledore apologetically. Yes, but you see, it is necessary to start with your scar, for it became apparent shortly after you rejoined the magical world that I was correct, and that your scar was giving you warnings when Voldemort was close to you, or else feeling powerful emotion. I know, said Harry wearily, and this ability of yours to detect Voldemort's presence even when he is disguised, and to know what he is feeling when his emotions are roused, has become more and more pronounced since Voldemort returned to his own body and his full powers. Harry did not bother to nod. He knew all of this already. More recently, said Dumbledore, I became concerned for more might realize that this connection between you exists. Sure enough, there came a time when you entered so far into his mind and his thoughts that he sensed your presence. I'm speaking, of course, on the night when you witnessed the attack on Mr. Weasley. Yes, Snape told me, Harry muttered. Professor Snape. Harry, Dumbledore corrected him quietly. But did you not wonder why it was not I who explained this to you, why I did not teach you, Orsini, why I had not so much as looked at you for months? Harry looked up. He could see now that Dumbo looked sad and tired. Yeah, Harry mumbled. Yeah, I wondered, you see, continued Dumbledore heavily. I believed it could not be long before Voldemort attempted to force his way into your mind, to manipulate and misdirect your thoughts, and I was eager to give him more incentives to do so. I was sure that if he realized our relationship was or had ever been closer than that of headmaster and pupil, he would seize his chance to use you as a means to spy on me. I fear the uses to which he would put you, the possibility that he might try and possess you. Harry, I believe I was right to think that Voldemort would have made use of you in such a way on those rare occasions when we had close contact. I thought I saw a shadow of him star behind your eyes. I was trying and distancing myself from you to protect you. An old man's mistake. Harry remembered the feeling that a dormant snake had risen in him, ready to strike on those occasions when he and Dumbledore made eye contact. For Roars aimed in possessing you as he demonstrated tonight would not have been my destruction, it would have been yours. He hoped, when he possessed you brief a short while ago, that I would sacrifice you in the hope of killing him. He sighed deeply. Harry was letting the words wash over him. He would have been so interested to know all this a few months ago, and now it was meaningless compared to the gaping chasm inside him. That was the loss of Sirius. None of it mattered. Sirius told me that you felt Voldemort awake inside you the very night I had the vision of Artha's attack. I knew at once the worst of my fears were correct. Voldemort from that point had realized he could use you in an attempt to arm you against Voldemort assaults on your mind. I arranged Orsini lessons with Professor Snape. He paused. Harry watched the sunlight, which was sliding slowly across the polished surface of Dumbledore's desk, illuminate a silver ink and handsome scarlet quill. Harry could tell the portraits all around them were awake and listening rapidly to Dumbledore's explanation. He could hear the occasional rustle of robes, the slight clearing of a throat. Phineas Nigellus had still not returned. Professor Snape discovered. Dumbledore resumed, that you had been dreaming about the daughter that the Department of Mysteries for months. Voldemort, of course, had been obsessed with the possibility of hearing the prophecy ever since he regained his body. And as he dwelled on the door, so did you, though you did not know what it meant. And then you saw Rookwood, who worked in the Department of Mysteries before his arrest, telling Voldemort what we had known all along, that the prophecies held in the Ministry of Magic are heavily protected. Only the people to whom they refer can lift them from the shelves without suffering madness. In this case, either Voldemort himself would have to enter the Ministry of Magic and risk revealing himself at last, or else you would have to take it from him. It became a matter of even greater urgency that you should master Oi. But I didn't, muttered Harry. He said it aloud to try and ease the dead weight of guilt inside him. Confession must surely relieve some of the terrible pressure squeezing at heart. I didn't practice, I didn't bother. I could have stopped myself having those dreams. Haim kept telling me to do it. If I had, he'd never have been able to show me where to go, and Sirius wouldn't something was erupting inside Harry's head, a need to justify himself, to explain. I tried to check he'd really taken Sirius. I went to office. I spoke to Creature in that fire, and he said Sirius wasn't there. He said he'd gone. Creature lied, Dumbledore said calmly. You are not his master. He could lie to you without even needing to punish himself. Creature intends you to go to the Ministry of Magic. He sent me on purpose. Oh yes, Creature, I'm afraid has Been serving more than one master for months. How, said Harry blankly. He hasn't been out at Grimmauld Place for years. Creature seized his opportunity shortly before Christmas, said Dumbledore. When Sirius apparently shouted at him to get out, he took Sirius at his word and interpreted this as an order to leave the house. He went to the only black family member for whom he had any respect left, Black's cousin Nyssa, the sister of Bellatrix and the wife of Lucius Malfoy. How do you know all this? Harry said. His heart was beating very fast. He felt sick. He remembered worrying about Creator's odd absence over Christmas, remembered him turning up again in the attic. Siri told me last night, said Dumbledore. You see, when you gave Professor Snape that cryptic warning, he realized that you had a vision of Cyrus trapped in the bowels of the Department of Mysteries. He liked